England had a king, but it had no power. When an army loses a war, it's a defeat. When a monarch forgets he's a king, it's a disaster. In 1453, Henry VI of England heard news of the fall of his last stronghold in France. He didn't react, didn't speak. For a year, no orders, no decisions, just silence. And so the game began. A game where every flower had thorns. A game that ended with crowns impaled on pikes, brothers in graves, and princes locked in a tower, never to return. This is not fiction. It happened. The real story behind Game of Thrones, bloodier, darker, and far more ruthless. Because there were no dragons, only people. And that makes it all the more terrifying. If you enjoy slow-burning, high-stakes history, where queens outwit armies and ambition drowns kingdoms, subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? We'd love to know which corner of the world this War of Roses has reached. The king was alive, but his soul was not. It was 1453. I, Richard, Duke of York, remember that day as if it were now. The air was heavy with the smell of wet timber when the messenger arrived from France. Castillon had fallen, Gascony lost, Bordeaux surrendered, 100 years of war, a century of blood, all for nothing. But when I entered the chamber at Westminster to see the king, I saw not a man, but an emptiness. Henry sat in silence, his eyes glassy, his lips parted, but mute. A day of silence, a week, a month, a year. That is how England lost something far greater than provinces. It lost its mind. When a kingdom is ruled by silence, someone else already holds the sword. That day I understood. I no longer had the right to wait. I was no servant. I was a grandson of kings. Through my mother, Anne Mortimer, I descended from Lionel of Antwerp, second son of Edward III. The Lancastrians came from the third son. My blood was not younger, it was stronger. I am no traitor. I am the heir. While Henry wandered through the clouds of his prayers, while his wife, Margaret of Anjou, rallied allies and ruled in his place, I remained silent. But my thoughts grew sharper than any steel. She was the fox beside the sleeping lion. She was fire that asked no permission. And I was ice that cut. I saw the throne surrounded by vipers, dukes, schemers, bribed courtiers. Parliament cracked like rotting wood. Barons raised armies, not for France, but for each other. And I thought, someone must put this kingdom on its knees, or it will fall face first into the mud. I had not yet declared war, but I no longer obeyed. I had not worn the crown, but I could already feel its weight. And when the symbols appeared, the roses white and red, I knew the path had been chosen. I ask not for your belief, I ask for your attention. If you wish to know how a monarchy tears itself apart, how a crown becomes a cage, how brothers become enemies, how loyalty is sold in sealed scrolls, then stay with me. Because what happened next? Even my enemies called it a game. But this was no game. This was England. I'll show you why this war began long before I was born, why our family was cursed, and why I had no choice. Stay with me, and I'll show you how wars begin and how kings die. I did not start this war. I inherited it. Because long before I ever drew breath, England was already cursed in the name of Edward III. The old king was mighty, a lion among monarchs. He had many sons, and that became our doom. 4 of them left heirs, and in time each of those heirs would believe they had a claim to the crown. The first son, Edward, Prince of Wales, died before his father. He left a son, Richard II, a boy with delicate hands and a head full of poetry, not politics. The second son, Lionel of Antwerp, was my ancestor. His daughter Philippa passed down that royal blood to my mother. That is my line, my foundation, my birthright. The third son, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, had a son, Henry Bolingbroke. He rose up in defiance, seized the throne from Richard II, and crowned himself Henry IV. And from that moment on, since the year 1399, everything went wrong. I was not yet born, but my blood had already been cheated. By every measure of inheritance, Lionel's line was older than Gaunt's, which meant that the crown was never theirs. It was ours. History is not written by God, but by a sword arriving on time. Henry IV, usurper. Henry V, son of a usurper, though skilled in war. Henry VI, grandson of a usurper, and a ghost in a crown. I held my tongue as long as silence was still a virtue. I served in France, in Ireland, in Parliament. But deep within me lived a truth. We were the law. They were the accident. You might ask, then why didn't your ancestor become king? Because he was dead. Because his child was a woman. Because England listens to force, not fairness. But we lived. We remembered. And when weakness returned to the throne, so did we. All I have is my name, but sometimes a name is heavier than a blade. When I looked at the Lancastrian emblem, the red rose, I saw not enemies. I saw a distortion of the natural order. When I held the white rose of York, I did not hold a symbol. I held a fact. My line had the right. I had the duty. And though I was not a man to raise rebellion for ambition, I was a man who remembered. And the time to remember had come. In the next part, I'll tell you about Margaret, a woman who gripped power more tightly than any man, how she turned a wedding ring into a weapon, and how the English crown became an altar of blood. Stay with me. The shadows are only beginning to move. They say God gave England a king. I say he gave her a shepherd that even the sheep feared. Henry VI was no monster. No, that would have been simpler. You can fight a monster. But what do you do with a king who's afraid of his own shadow? I remember how he sat for hours in his chapel while the country burned. He didn't pray for victory. He prayed for forgiveness, for peace, for stillness. England doesn't want peace, my lord, I longed to tell him. She wants justice, or vengeance, or truth, but not peace. While I served in France, I watched men die for an empire that no longer existed. And back home, Henry was building monasteries. When I returned, I found the throne not empty, but worse, occupied by absence, and beside it stood the one who had everything he lacked, Margaret of Anjou. Don't ask who she was to the king, ask who she was to the crown. A sharp mind, a will forged in the French court, eyes that didn't dim even at funerals. When Henry was silent, she spoke. When he prayed, she commanded. When he hid, she appointed generals. The queen became the power, and the king the shadow. While the lion sleeps, the fox steals the crown. She formed a faction, Somerset, Northumberland, Exeter, men who saw in me not an heir, but a threat. I saw how she looked at me during court, not with a wife's eyes, but a player's. She knew who I was, and I knew who she was. This was not hatred. This was awareness, like queens left on a chessboard after the pawns are gone. We did not choose the game, but we both knew how it was played. I hadn't raised my banner, but I was preparing. When Henry slipped into his sacred sleep, they named me Protector of the Realm. For a brief moment, I was the kingdom's head, and I saw what England could be if the throne were not a curse, but a helm. But Henry awoke, and like a puppet sensing its strings, he handed it all back to Margaret, and I was cast aside. Her prayer is my undoing, her sacrifice is England. I'll tell you how the first blood spilled at St. Albans, how the war that had whispered finally spoke in steel, and why I would wait no longer for permission. Stay with me. The silence is over. Now, you'll hear the clash. They say patience is a virtue. It is, but only for those who don't intend to wear a crown. I knew patience. I waited. I watched this kingdom crack at the seams. I tried peace, Parliament, the council, the title of protector. But every step I took broke another rung beneath me. When Henry regained consciousness, I was cast aside. When I spoke of order, they called me ambitious. When I demanded justice, they threw loyalty at me like a dagger. Obedience, I told one of the lords, is the last refuge of the weak, and in this game it is never the obedient who survive. I would be silent no longer, so I rode north to Ludlow, my bastion, my home. There, among hills and stone, I gathered those who still remembered what England looked like without chaos. Old allies, Salisbury, his son Warwick, the Duke of Norfolk. We were no conspirators. We were a reminder that kingdoms are not held together by prayers and palace whispers. And then we chose no more petitions, no more requests, only demands, and if we must, by sword. May 20, 1455, the first Battle of St. Albans. The town was still asleep when we entered from three sides. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a surgery. We didn't burn. We excised. Somerset, dead. Northumberland, dead. Clifford, dead. 3 of the Queen's fiercest loyalists, eliminated. The King, found in an apothecary's home, alive, and, as always, bewildered. I knelt before him, not as a victor, but as an Englishman who wanted England to breathe. Your Grace, we are not against you. We are against what the Crown has done to you. After St. Albans, I was named Protector once more, temporarily, with limits, with snares, because those who lose never forget. And Margaret, she did not forget. She left the court, but not the fight. Her eyes looked back at me from every sealed letter, every envoy, every gathering army. I knew this was only the beginning. One rose had fallen, but thousands still bloomed. Next, a war without peace. I'll tell you about the battles that left no diplomat standing, about betrayal, death, and how my son, Edward, went further than I ever dared. Stay with me, because once you step out of the shadows, the first blow always finds you. Peace is a word that loses all meaning when it comes from a king who cannot hold a sword. After St. Albans, England did not awaken reborn. She awoke with blood on her teeth. Parliament trembled. The court whispered. The church stayed silent. And despite every attempt to declare reconciliation, I saw clearly this was no resolution. It was only the warm-up. This peace smells like a freshly dug grave, I told Warwick. He didn't disagree. 1459, the Battle of Ludford Bridge. We were forced to retreat, our men confused, betrayed. I fled to Ireland, my son Edward to Calais. It was the worst winter, not for its cold, but for the shame. I, a rightful heir, living like a fugitive. They wrote I had rebelled, but who had truly rebelled against whom? Me against the country, or the country against itself. But England's memory is short, and fear still lingers in men's bones. By 1460, we returned. Salisbury, Warwick, myself. An army rose from stone like a legend unearthed. And at Northampton, we won. We took the king again. I did not proclaim myself king. I submitted a legal claim, the Act of Accord, declaring that my lineage had the rightful claim to the crown. Parliament agreed, but with one condition: Henry would remain king until his death, and after him, the crown would pass to me. Peace through compromise, they called it. Compromise, I said, is when everyone is unhappy, but still breathing. And then came the Wakefield trap, end of 1460. I left my stronghold with my army, certain in strength, in law, in fate. But fate is a woman, and if you approach her too confidently, she slits your throat. Margaret lured me and struck. My forces crushed, I killed. My second son slain. They placed a paper crown on my severed head and nailed it to the city gates. But I had another son, younger, fiercer than I, and his name was Edward. I will speak no more, but you will hear my legacy, my son, the one who won't ask, the one who will take. Stay with us. The war hasn't truly begun. I was already gone, but my voice hadn't died, because my voice was him, Edward. He was 19 when they killed me, and in his eyes there were no tears, only fire. I will not forgive, and I will not wait, he said. What my father could not do, I will, and I will do it fast. He was not like me. I was cautious, he reckless. I built, he broke. While my body still hung from the city walls, he gathered an army. He won at Mortimer's Cross, a strike that forced Margaret to retreat. And then he marched into London. No permission, no vote, no parliament. The people welcomed him because the city wanted a king, not a ghost. And he took the crown. Edward IV, the first king from the House of York. He was magnetic, tall, handsome, shining in armor, always smiling. The people adored him. Women worshipped him. Soldiers followed without question. The throne isn't a place, it's gravity, they said of him. And he pulled everyone, friend or foe, into his orbit. But in the wine that flowed through his veins, there was rust. He didn't know restraint. In love, indulgent. In vengeance, merciless. In trust, naive. And worst of all, he fell in love. Elizabeth Woodville, a widow, no dowry, no title, no strategic worth. The king married her in secret, and in doing so, spat in the face of every alliance in England. A woman in bed is not a kingdom on the map, they warned him, but he listened to his heart, and hearts do not hear warnings. His greatest ally, Warwick, the kingmaker, took offense, and England trembled again. My son took the crown, but can he keep it? I asked that question from beyond, where no answers live, because the war was not over, and Margaret was still breathing. I will tell you how an ally becomes a traitor, how the man who raised a king tries to tear him down, and how even victors can lose their crowns. Stay with us. The sharpest knives are the ones lying closest. There is one thing a king fears more than rebellion, a friend he trusts. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker. He made my son king, lifted him from the mire of civil war like a god from stone. But no architect tolerates a building that grows beyond his blueprint. When Edward married Elizabeth Woodville, Warwick saw it not as love, but betrayal. He was negotiating with France, planning a royal alliance, and instead, Edward chose a widow with children and a family that began collecting titles like coins. "I made you king, Edward," Warwick told him, "but not so you could become a boy in a woman's bed." My son did not forgive, and he did not explain. 2 lions, 1 throne, and in the end, one of them would pounce. 1469 to 1470, rebellion after rebellion. Warwick rose. He deposed Edward. The king, exiled. The queen, in danger. Irony. Warwick returned to Margaret of Anjou, the very woman he once fought to destroy. "We fought for justice and returned to a ghost," someone muttered in Calais. "No," I thought, "we returned to habit." But my son was not me. He did not wait. He gathered ships and men and fury. 1471, the Battle of Barnet, rain, fog, betrayal in the ranks, and Warwick dead. The kingmaker fell face first into the mud that stank of blood. That same year, the Battle of Tewkesbury, Margaret's army crushed, her son slain, her dynasty erased. Edward took back his crown, and he did it alone, not as an heir, but as a monarch in his own right. I made him a king, but now he is more than I ever dreamed, I thought. And maybe, from where there is no sun, I smiled. Next, princes in the Tower. My 3rd son, Richard, quiet, loyal, brilliant. But even he carried the same disease we all did, the crown. I will tell you how he became king and how darkness fell on London. Stay with us. History still has one more blade to draw. I had 3 sons. One became a king, one died in battle, and the 3rd became a legend England fears to name. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, my youngest. Quiet, loyal, obedient. He was different. Not the kind who seeks power, but the kind who serves it. While Edward ruled, Richard remained silent. He was a shadow, intelligent, austere. He governed the North, fought loyally, stayed clear of courtly filth. Men feared him, not because of what he said, but what he never needed to. "Richard doesn't shout," they said. "He simply arrives." But in 1483, everything changed. Edward IV, dead. Suddenly, without warning, his heir, a boy, Prince Edward, aged 12, the crown, once again, became prey. And Richard, he didn't betray, no. He seized power the way one grips a blade, silently, swiftly, deep. The boy was intercepted on his way to coronation. He and his younger brother were placed in the Tower of London. Temporarily, they said, and then silence. They vanished. 2 princes in the heart of London. No witnesses, no bodies, no answers. And Richard became king, Richard III. History will judge him. History already has. Some say he murdered his brother's sons. Some that he was framed. Some that this was war. And in war, only those who ask no questions survive. But I know one thing. The crown is not given, it is taken, and those who take it do not ask permission. Richard ruled for 2 years. He was harsh, but just. He was king, but alone. And in the end, he paid for everything. Because one day, on the coast of Lancashire, a new player landed, Henry Tudor. In the final chapter, Bosworth, when a horse is worth a crown. I will tell you how my house fell, how, on a fog-drenched field, one game ended and another began. Stay with us, because the final act always roars the loudest. And so we arrive at the end. Everything that began with the silence of a king, the ambition in my heart, the blood of my sons, would end in the midst of a field called Bosworth. August 22nd, 1485. Richard III, King of England, Henry Tudor, a challenger from across the sea, with no lineage, no rightful claim, just a promise. But that promise had two powerful weapons. One, he would marry Elizabeth of York, daughter of my son Edward. Two, he would end a war that had bled England for 30 years. Richard rode out like a lion, armored, proud, unflinching. He charged into the heart of Henry's lines. He killed the standard-bearer. He nearly reached his rival. But allies he trusted stood still. The Stanleys, they betrayed him. And in a blink, the charge turned to collapse. A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse! He cried as the animal beneath him fell. It was not just a cry. It was the end of the House of York. Richard died on the field, his body defiled, displayed like a trophy, his crown given to another. Henry VII Tudor, the new king, a new emblem, the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York united. A marriage that would symbolize peace, but not agreement, because this was the end of war, not the end of hunger. I did not see that day, but I felt it. For in the moment my house fell, history shifted its voice. The game is over, they said. No, the game simply changed players. What remained after the roses, and so it ends. The Yorks fallen, the Lancasters gone. But England was just beginning a new kind of rule. It looked like peace. It sounded like unity. It smelled like legacy. But peace built on bones never stands still for long. For what came next was darker. Ahead lies tyranny and martyrs. A girl crowned queen at 13, beheaded before 20, a brother who will execute his sister, and a king who discards wives faster than others discard conscience. The wars of the roses were blood, but the Tudors, they are poison. In our next story, we will guide you through the Tudor era, how from the shattered roses a new order rose, and why even the brightest crowns cast the darkest shadows.